Welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast, conversations to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. An uplifting and inspiring series of conversations and talks with your host, Jackie Woodside. We are educating minds, empowering lives, and enlightening souls to create a world where love prevails. In this engaging podcast, we deliver exciting, positive, transformative talks and teachings designed to elevate your life. Now, let's join our host, Jackie Woodside, for this week's session.
Hi, everybody. Jackie Woodside here again for another episode of the Conscious Living Podcast. We are here with a mission to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. And today I could not be more happy, more thrilled, and more excited, actually, to be working with a dear friend and an extraordinary colleague of mine. One of those colleagues I have to admit that I kind of brag about, that he's a friend of mine. So Dr. Nick Morgan is joining us today. Nick Morgan is someone who is literally a world-renowned expert in the field of communications. He's probably most known for being a highly sought after public speaking coach, but also just an expert on how to influence, how to make your point, how to connect. So I thought, what better person to bring in to the Conscious Living Podcast for us to dive in deeply about the notion of what does it take, what does it look like, and even what does it mean to be conscious when we are communicating. So Dr. Nick Morgan has written 4 extraordinary books. And I have to say, Nick, I can't say this to every guest. I have read all 4 of the books that you have written. What I most love about Nick is I can Google any topic on public speaking, and I promise you he will be referenced in the top 3 or 4 items because he has an epic blog. He has been a commentator on presidential debates for CNN. He has literally been flown around the world to work with presidents and dignitaries of all sorts and stripes. And it's just a pleasure and a joy and an honor, Nick, to spend this time with you. So thank you for joining us. Tell our listeners a little bit more about you. I've said a little bit, but feel free to dive in and just, help people get to know you a little bit more.
Thanks, Jackie. And first, back at you. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and this is going to be fun. I start my communication story 2 places depending on my mood, and so for the conscious crowd, let's say, I think the appropriate one is to start when I was 17, and I was in a tobogganing accident, fractured my skull. I was unconscious. I was in a coma for a week.
That explains lots of things.
It really does. And I briefly died.
Wow.
The classic 5 seconds, call the medics, come in with the paddles and shock me back to life. So I'm very fortunate. I don't mean to make light of this. I was very fortunate to have a very skilled neurosurgeon save my life. So I'm forever grateful.
Wonderful.
But when I woke up, they give you a test to see if you're still compos mentis, so if you're with it. And I passed the little test, but there was something missing, and that was harder to describe. I wasn't aware of it at the time, and there was no test for it. And that was something I discovered when I went back to school, that I could no longer read the body language of my buddies in the same way that everybody can. We hire body language experts, and we talk to them, people like me, and we try to make our art as esoteric as possible. But the reality is that we are all experts in body language of people that we know well.
Okay.
And of course, you know this, as children grow up watching, scanning their parents to see, are they in a good mood or the bad mood? Am I likely to get an extra piece of cake or not? And of course, far more serious matters in order to order their world, to get what sense of control kids can have of their world. It's very important for them to be able to read the body language of the people around them. And as we grow up and we form long-term connections, we can read those people's body language. We can tell if they come in all excited about something, or they've gotten bad news or something like that. We can instantly tell. Well, I couldn't do that anymore. Just, it was gone. And so when my friend said, Nick, you look great, being sarcastic, I said, thanks. And they said, no, we're being sarcastic. You look terrible. What happened to you? And then that's when I realized there was something wrong. So it took me a year of studying body language consciously, this thing that we normally do unconsciously. We just register, oh, Jackie's in a good mood, or, oh, Jackie's had some bad news. And I had to relearn that consciously and study people. And
including facial expressions as well?
Facial expressions,
Wow.
Body language in general. Yeah. And I'm sure part of it was just simple healing of my brain over time.
Wow.
And then finally I was able to do it again, but I always retained this slightly weird ability to do it consciously. Most of us don't do it consciously.
Right.
For good reasons. It would take too long if we did.
Yeah. What difference has that made for you, Nick? I mean, clearly it has influenced your career. You are an expert at helping people be conscious of how they are speaking and how they are communicating, both with their voice, with their words, and with their body. 3 disparate parts of communication. So how has that helped you, that you went through that experience where you had to learn it consciously?
Well, it means it is just part of the way I naturally think. A presentation. And so the idea of consciousness is fascinating, because we have our conscious minds, and somebody who works with this all the time, I'm keenly aware, but our conscious minds are fairly small things. The neuroscientists tell us we can handle about 40 bits of information a second. Maybe that sounds like a lot until you know that the unconscious mind can handle 11 million bits of information a second. So it's going like crazy while your conscious mind is struggling to keep up. And so there's a good reason why you want the reading of body language to be unconscious.
Wow.
But then that raises the question of, so what does that mean to be mindful or conscious?
Right. Of something that's happening in the unconscious mind.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an interesting.
So how do you do that? Like, what, because the reason I'm pushing on this a little bit, Nick, is that I think it would benefit everyone to learn a little bit about this whole thing about being more conscious of our unconscious communication. So, and I think you had to learn things about it that maybe could benefit everybody.
Yes, the first thing to be aware of is that we don't read body language in the way that we think we do. Not only is it unconscious, but it's also, we don't just watch people's, say, facial expressions and then decode them in our minds. So I don't say, oh, Jackie's smiling, therefore she's happy. What actually happens is that I see you smiling, and a neuron fires in my brain, which is the other person smiling neuron, which makes me feel warm inside.
Right.
And that happens faster than the conscious mind can keep up.
Right.
But that's a good thing, because then when humans get together, we share our feelings and we have a good time, we commune and we connect, which is what humans like to do. We have this myth about ourselves that we're all independent beings.
Right. Could not be further from the truth.
Right. We are communal beings. And that's why during this time of COVID, we are so downcast and sorry about not being able to go to big sporting events or music events or church services or even conferences where speakers like me and you hold forth.
Right. Exactly right. I love that communal, community, communication, they all have that same root word of coming together, for a purpose. Community, communitatis, where we come together to get to know who we really are. And I think that is the root of community and communication. You mentioned conferences. You and I both, you particularly, but we are both speakers on stages. And you also know I teach longer term programs where I'm with people for several months at a time. So I do both kind of stage speaking, which I call my one night stand. And then I do the, longer in-depth work in programs. And I have to say, I do prefer the longer in-depth work, because I like to create the relationships, as we were just saying, I like to be in community and create community. But maybe selfishly, I like seeing people's lives change right before my eyes. And what I came to, I'm going someplace with this that I want to ask your opinion on, but what I came to see as a public speaker, and I call it my one night stand. It's fun while it lasts, but not very gratifying over the long haul. It's kind of how I came to see being on stages, and I still do it, but not as much as I used to. It's what I call metaphysical. And our listeners can relate to this, where you go and you hear a great speaker and like you're so inspired and you're going to go change the world and change your life. And I'm going to actually get it together this time. And this time will be different. And then you get home and you go to your email inbox and you got the kids and, you're back at the office with the same people and the same facial expressions. And, and that's what I call metaphysical. From that
I love it.
Heightened enthusiasm to the sense of, kind of mundane day-to-day reality where our, our zest and our enthusiasm wanes. So can you address that from, is it possible to have a lasting impact from the stage? You've got 45 minutes, you've got an hour and a half, with people you're never going to see again. How do we create lasting impact? And for those of you who are listeners who aren't speakers, maybe you all have experiences where you have brief transitory exchanges with people. And I'll just bet that Nick has a lot to say about how to have an impact in a conscious way on people. So is it possible, number one? And number two, if it's possible, what are the elements that make it real?
I think it is possible,
Okay.
or I wouldn't be
right. You wouldn't be in the field otherwise.
Right.
Good.
And I think it's challenging mostly because most speakers and most people think about communication in the wrong way. When I'm talking, that's the most interesting thing that's going on in the world right then. And then when you're talking, I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. That's all too often the reality. So what the speaker has to do in order to get out of that little trap, that little box, is to make the speech about the audience. And so if we focus on the audience's journey that it's going on, then we have a chance of actually changing their lives and getting beyond that metaphysical that you talk about, which is metaphysical. There we go. Yeah, which is brilliant. I love that.
Feel free to steal it.
And thank you. And it's the nightmare of meeting planners and speaker bureaus and all the industry that supports public speakers like you and me, because they don't want anybody to write in the feedback, yeah, it was great, I had this mountaintop experience, and then an hour later I'd forgotten. It was like eating takeout food, and so to avoid that, they tend to focus on exactly the wrong thing, which is they push speakers like you and me to have takeaways, to have real specific things that you can hang on to. And a little insider dope, which will be fun for your listeners, is that the industry looks for what they call the cell phone slide, which is wrong on so many levels. But what that means is the slide that the speaker puts up that's so compelling because it has, here are the 6 things that you need to do to change your life instantly without any effort for the way better.
It just happened for you.
Exactly. All you have to do is take a picture with your cell phone.
A picture of this slide.
And of course, if we're having a real conversation with the audience and we're taking them on a journey to change their minds about something, then we shouldn't be spending too much of our time looking at slides, because that's pulling our conscious minds away from the speaker and the connection with the speaker. But even with that, it's the wrong idea to think there can be a bunch of takeaways on a slide that are just instantly going to change your life. So that's the thing to focus on is, and I always say, start with the question, what is the problem that the audience has for which my expertise is the solution? Yeah. And if I don't know that, I'm not ready to talk to them. Then I am just the worst kind of speaker that goes out and says, do this and your life will be better. And I have no idea who I'm talking to. Maybe they've already done it. Right. Maybe they've tried it and it's failed for them. And so it seems like the worst kind of cynicism for them to hear it. But if I know what the audience's problems, hopes, wishes, fears, and dreams are, then I can start a conversation with them, beginning with them, and then say, you might want to think about this, and nudge them along and get them to the point where they are ready to change.
Nice. And I'm thinking that translates into any relational interface, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be on a speaker on a stage to an audience, but if you want to, when you said, if you want to change someone's mind, or if you want to have influence, have an impact, I have a 16-year-old son, I have a spouse, I've got siblings and coworkers that I often want to influence and change their minds, as I'm sure many people listening do. So there's parallels there
Sure.
to any relational interface. Understand where their problem is,
Mm-hmm.
relate to them, not just to you.
Listen more than you talk.
Listen more than you talk. Be curious.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine that's really leans into that. Like, can you be curious about what their experience is, what their point of view is, rather than like just coming in and presenting your point of view? Can you be curious? Yeah. Anything more? And then presenting, I like what you said, kind of nudge them over here. You might want to think about this. So say, deepen that a little bit. Say more about that.
Well, if you want to think about it from the speaker's point of view, then we can take it a little further, and we can say, in a more directive way, all right, let's say we get into your problem, the audience's problem. And let's say the audience's problem is that they're all beekeepers and their bees are dying. Okay. There's that mysterious, what's it called? The hive death syndrome. That isn't quite right, but it's something's going on.
Yeah.
Bees are dying. Yeah. So they come in with that problem. And if I show that I understand that problem, and I start talking about, ain't it awful? The bees are dying everywhere. Then they're going to be nodding their heads. And at a certain point, because this is the way the brain naturally works, they're going to start saying, okay, so yeah, you got me. What are we going to do about this? Mm-hmm. And so their minds will open to hear a solution. And if I've walked with them on that journey and I show I know something about it, if I share a bit of expertise so that they begin to trust me and think, yeah, this guy does know what he's talking about, then at the crucial point, I can say, so here's my 6-point program for solving the mysterious bee death thing.
Right. Exactly.
And they'll be receptive to it.
Yes.
And that's not all. You still need to do more, which is, and again, we're just talking about speakers here. The same basic intention applies, but it's slightly different. It's a little less sort of directive and authoritative. If we're talking, usually we're talking colleagues or friends or a spouse or a teenage son. Then the next thing is, you've asked these people to listen, these 45 minutes. So they've been passive, and it's not human nature to be passive for long periods of time. So you've got to give them a chance to be active. And that's the key to ending a speech successfully. It is sort of the zen of speaking, is to turn it back over to them and let them do something with it. And if you can do that creatively and beautifully at the end of a speech, they'll be on their feet cheering you.
What do you do that gets the audience active?
Well, I can give you a lovely example. One of my favorites from a few years back, pre-pandemic. This is sort of the 2015s or thereabouts. And a friend of mine, a business speaker, whom I'd written a number of speeches with, and we'd worked together on. He was doing well. He got an opportunity to speak. Because he had a Christian background, he had an opportunity to speak to one of those mega churches out in California.
Yeah,
and it was their annual conference, and they were bringing in all the assistant pastors and music directors and church administrators, all the administrative people of a church. And the theme was abundance, and apparently the research showed, as these people came in, they were concerned about was, if only we had more money, if only we had more volunteers, if only we had more help, if only we had more this, if only we had more that, we could do so much more, right? There's a world of need out there. I'm ready, oh Lord, to do the work. I just need more help. And so he was brought in to give him a tough love message of, you've already got all you need. Stop whining, stop complaining. I mean, in the nicest possible way, and get to work. So that was his message. It was an abundance message. And we worked on the speech. But the point I want to direct you to is the ending, where we thought, how can we demonstrate in a way that brings the audience in, this idea that they already have all they need. And it turned out to be so simple that once we thought of it, we just fell off our chairs laughing, and we were sort of kicking ourselves. Why did we think of this before? But we said at the end, everybody reach into their pocket or their pocketbook and grab the loose change that you find there. People still had loose change in those days. And we had done some research, because research is easy on Google, that discovered that people on average had 50 cents in their pocket or their pocketbook.
Okay.
Seems reasonable, right? We're good enough to get going. So we were assuming everybody had 50 cents in their hands at that point. And we said, hold out your hand like this. And on the count of 3, you're going to throw it on the floor. So there were 12,000 people there. So
wow.
Yeah, so 12,000 people on 3 throwing money on the floor. It made this terrific, ridiculous sound. And we had runners all around with the tubs running around, picking it up. And then we were able to announce to that audience that in less than a minute, they had just raised $6,000 for the charity that they were assigning that conference to benefit, which they did every year because they're good people.
That is so great.
And they were just blown away, right? I mean, again, it's obvious once you think of it, but somebody had to do it to make it obvious. And they felt like they had participated.
Yeah.
They had started it. They had given some part of that money. And so they were able to be active. And the symbolism of abundance was proven in the moment. And they just loved it. They gave them a raving standing ovation.
Oh, that is so great. So you're right. They didn't have the concept of abundance. They actually had the experience of abundance.
Yes. And it's really important because we are physical beings to embody that. That's why action at the end of a speech is so important. If we embody it, then we believe it. We feel like it's real. And we remember it better.
So great.
So yeah, look for the chance, and you can't use that. That won't work. Please, everybody understand. That isn't a universal action that everybody can take at the end, right? It's just it worked in that moment for that particular theme and that particular audience. You have to come up with your own. But if you can get the audience to do something that's physical, that embodies it and turns their energy loose, then they're ready to go out and get started.
That's so great. And it leads me to another point that I always want your input on this. Speakers get really uptight about their content. I have so much that I have to say. It's only a 20-minute talk. How am I going to fit it all in? You're an expert in an area. You have a lot to say. And then you're up there on the stage. And then there's, how am I going to say it? So I'm curious your thought, again, both on the stage and just in day-to-day life, content or delivery? That's right. Is it that you've got to have really good content? Because I remember I went to a conference at Harvard a few years ago, and they brought in it was one of their mental health conferences. I want to say who it was, but it wouldn't be very nice. But this was a top level person in the field, and internationally known leader, and it was the worst talk I had ever attended. I took nothing away from it because his delivery was so bad. So talk to me both from the stage and from, face-to-face life across the dinner table, content and or delivery.
Love it. So every communication is always 2 conversations.
Okay.
And they're simultaneous: content and delivery. And it's important to think of them as 2 conversations with equal validity, because people don't think of it that way. We don't consciously think so much about our delivery. And in fact, when I ask professional speakers, people who are just in business and organizations trying to give speeches, how much time do you spend preparing a speech in terms of the content versus the body language? They look at me funny and they say 100% content, 0 body language. Nobody ever thinks about the body language. Occasionally I'll get somebody who says 50-50, and I'll go, that's really interesting. You're unusual. Tell me, what is it you think about? Yeah. And they'll say, well, my grandmother told me to smile before I started to speak. Or I have a favorite outfit that I wear. It makes me feel confident, and which is not a bad thing. Neither one of those things are bad, but neither one of them even begins to address the issue, right? Or they just begin to address the issue, to be fair, I guess. So here's the thing. There are two conversations going on. And so to put it in a very simple way, and let's take it off the stage just for fun.
Yeah.
Right. And to make it more about ordinary life. But let's say I'm coming home to my significant other, and I've texted, we've had a text exchange. And she said to me, pick up milk and eggs. And I'm listening to NPR, and I get all involved in it, and I forget about the milk and eggs. And I walk in the door, obviously not carrying milk and eggs. And I say, suddenly remembering when I see my significant other, because it reminds me, oh, shoot, I was supposed to get milk and eggs.
Milk and eggs.
Oops. And I say, I ask the reflexive partner question, how are you, hun? And hoping that her answer is some shade of not too bad, even though I just realized you don't have the milk and eggs with you. And her response is, and I always ask people, what's the classic partner response? And they hem and haw from it, and then they get it. It's fine. When you think about it, that's what people say under their circumstances. And the question is, the word fine means fine. So if I just listen to the content, everything's good, right?
Right.
Completely forgiven that I forgot the milk and eggs. But of course, it's not, that's just the first conversation. The second conversation, which is the one that matters, is how does he or she say fine?
Right.
Is it fine? Like, oh my God, you've done it again? Or is it fine? Like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Or is it fine? Like, I'm furious because you forgot the milk and eggs.
Right.
Yeah, you always forget.
Yeah.
And I was going to make a quiche. I need the eggs.
Right.
So, so the whole grade, the endless gradation of possible responses matters enormously at that point. The second conversation matters enormously. So that silly little example teaches us a number of things. First of all, in that moment, the content doesn't matter.
Right. The content tells you nothing, quite honestly.
Tells you nothing, absolutely nothing. It's all in the body language. Now, that's not always the case, right? Sometimes content does matter. Sometimes exact words do matter.
Sure.
But especially in ordinary situations, but much of the time, and in situations like your Harvard conference, the body language, the second conversation matters more if it overwhelms the first one.
Yeah.
And it can easily overwhelm the first one. We can all imagine many scenarios when it does. And so here's the thing about that. We humans are not hardwired consciously to notice that second conversation. We notice it unconsciously. Remember back to the earlier part of our conversation where we were saying with somebody that you know well, we pick that up instantly. Yeah. And what we care about is the intent behind the body language. We don't care about the body language. I don't care whether she or he is doing this or bad or frowning or smiling. What I care about is, what does that tell me about the intent behind it? That's what matters. That's everything to me.
Yeah.
And so that second conversation is complicated in two ways. First of all, it's stuff that we don't pick up consciously, but we are unconscious experts in. And secondly, we don't care about that conversation for what it is specifically. We care about the intent behind it. Mm-hmm. And so noticing that second conversation is a real chore. It takes work. So that's what I do. I help people to do that. And for a few weeks, typically as we're working together, they hate me for it because I'm asking them to do a lot of hard work. Give your speech or do your communicating, and at the same time notice both what you're communicating with your second conversation and what the audience is receiving and how they're responding. Wow. And that's a lot of work to make it conscious. And then after a while, you get good at it, or you at least get good enough at it, and then you can let it go back into the unconscious mind.
Yeah, like any other skill, right?
Right.
In order to master any skill, it takes a tremendous amount of energy and effort and focus, and then it becomes mastery. And once you've mastered it, what is it called? Unconscious competence?
Yes, you start out with unconscious incompetence, I think.
Yes.
And then you're consciously
incompetent,
and then you want to get to the conscious competence.
Competent, where you can do it, but you've got to think it through.
Right.
And then unconsciously competent when you become it.
That's the goal.
Yeah, that's
the goal.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and the best place to go for understanding that at a deep level is Zen and those many books like the tea ceremony books and Zen and the Art of Archery and that kind of thing, where they talk about those sort of the mastery and without getting too fussy about it, but they make it clear that what you have to do is both turn on your mind in the sense of openness and turn it off in the sense of in the long run, the goal is not to have conscious competence. You don't want to end up there, but to have unconscious competence. And so they've learned lots of ways to sort of speed that process.
Can you mention a couple of them, ways to speed that process towards unconscious competence with your communication? Any come to mind?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the first thing is the ickiest and the hardest, and that is to open yourself up to being really bad at it. Because you've got to be willing to suffer through that. That shows that your mind knows that it doesn't know how to do this, and it's feeling awkward. That's the sign that you're learning. But none of us wants to go through that. When I'm coaching people, one of the excuses I often get from busy executives who don't want to appear incompetent, that's not a good feeling for them, is when it's time to rehearse a speech, they'll say, well, I don't want to rehearse it because it'll get stale.
Oh, right.
I'll overdo it and I'll get bored with it and then I won't be able to do it. Well, as any professional speaker knows, that's not going to happen for years.
Right.
Yes, you can get bored with a speech 4, 5, 6 years in if you're doing anything like a good job, but by then it will have changed. The subject matter will have changed.
Exactly right.
It's not going to be the same anyway.
To be really bad at it at first.
Yeah. But that's what the executive doesn't like, is that's why they're saying, I don't want to get stale. What they're really saying is, I don't want to appear embarrassingly bad in front of you.
I don't want to look bad at this.
Yeah.
And so how can someone be really bad at the second conversation of body language, facial expression, tone of voice? Like, how can someone be really bad at it? Just playing with different types of delivery? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. You can do it two ways. You can either give yourself a chore to do. And this is funny as long as the stakes aren't too high.
Yeah.
If the stakes are high, it's going to backfire on you, so don't do it. But give yourself a chore to do, like say, I'm going to stand in a certain way.
Okay.
Or I'm going to do certain things with my feet.
Okay.
So that's working with the body consciously, with stuff that's normally left to your unconscious mind, you normally don't think about. And you say, I look at myself in the mirror. I know I look better if I stand up straight and tuck in my tummy and put a smile on your face. So give yourself the job then of walking out and doing that. And what's hilarious is, hilarious in the I feel stupid, bad kind of way, is how quickly you'll forget to do that.
Right. How quickly you go unconscious. You go back into unconsciousness, which brings us all the way back to this whole point that conscious communication is a skill that people can practice, develop, and get better at.
Yeah.
We are largely unconscious. I'll tell you a little story about something I did with the second conversation that helped tremendously. I was in a particular parenting phase with my son where I was frequently impatient with him. And I was noticing that my tone of voice was really kind of short, irritated, and impatient when I was speaking with him more often than not. And then I got irritated with myself. I was like, I got to stop this. No kid's going to want to hang out with a parent that's, more consistently irritated than not. So I just put it in my mind consciously